All right. Hello, everyone. So I just wanted to do a little bit of an impromptu live stream today. Hoping my connection will hold. The last couple were a bit shaky. And there's a couple things I wanted to hit on. Feel free to chime in whenever you'd like. But I'm happy to see some doubling down on the focus on fitness, which is probably the least attractive discussion or topic in preparedness. And I've got a few bullet points in front of me. How's it going, Joe? One of my very loyal subscribers. I always appreciate you chiming in. My crew of Joes. We'll see if the other Joe pops in too. So Magic Prepper and Angry Prepper have been focusing a little more on fitness. Angry Prepper has, of course, started the Angry Fitness channel, and he's setting some really easy benchmarks for people to follow along with, which is pretty smart. So if you're in a position right now where you're not super satisfied with where you are, that's a pretty easy one to follow along with. And he sets, again, like really realistic benchmarks in terms of just adding more movement over the course of your day. There's the other Joe. Hey, guys, how's it going? And I was just hoping you'd show up, Stavin. So good to see you. And anyway, yeah, so as far as the fitness stuff, there's a lot of realistic benchmarks you can set for yourself. And really adding movement throughout the course of your day is huge. If you have a desk job or you're really like you're around your homestead, you're around your house a lot, you really have to double down on what you're doing, even if it's just walking. And then I really would recommend working up to doing some light weightlifting, depending on what your limitations are, depending on what type of injuries or things maybe you sustained over the years. And you really do need to watch what you eat. I've been very careful lately. Joe, that's amazing on the 170-pound weight loss. Congratulations. I've dropped about 20 pounds over the last few months myself. I've shifted mostly to an elimination diet. I've been keeping a pretty strict meat and cheese diet like Atkins, but even more extreme, no carbs at all. It's only been the last couple of days where I've even flirted with them, and I completely avoid gluten. And I found that I have more energy. I have a lot less aches and pains by eliminating a lot of this stuff. The gluten for me is a huge killer. I don't know if anybody has that kind of problem. And yeah, it's not fun when I kind of finally came to the conclusion that that was a cause of some issues. It was definitely a life changer. So if you're having some weird chronic pains and aches, you may want to start looking at your diet as one of the causes of a lot of that. You started over 400 pounds before this popped off. Wow, man. Yeah, keep it up. Really, like as long as you're careful and you stay active. A lot of people have obviously gone the other direction over the last couple of years as far as their fitness goes, especially with gyms closing. It's really easy to end up in a rut and neglecting your fitness and the expense. And people get lazy, right? We want to make excuses why we're not physically fit or why we're not taking care of ourselves. And there's really no reason to not be as physically fit as you possibly can. And, if we have time in the day that we're sitting here burning, YouTube, for example, when you're done with this, or throw on a pair of headphones and go to the gym or go for a walk, it's really easy to do. I'm going to head to the gym later today. And I've been ignoring that for a number of days now, and I really shouldn't have. And I'm definitely paying for it a little bit every time I go back. Recently, I was like, oh, wow, I'm getting a bit winded much earlier than I would, or even just noticeable loss in strength by avoiding the gym for a few weeks at a time. It's just a bad move. The other thing I want to hit on too, I am in Florida now, and there are a number of preparedness channels based out of Florida. So I would like to start reaching out and maybe doing some collab videos, or at least building an information network and kind of bumping videos off each other in the hopes of maybe switching some more people on. Because much like you see in the northern states or out west, you get a lot of people who get really panicky come hurricane season, and they go buy up all the generators, all the plywood, every single battery, all the bottled water, and the milk and eggs, obviously, just like a blizzard situation. So even just putting more information out on that, making more allies by introducing them to really basic preparedness ideas, that maybe you should just put a couple extra things back. So that type of stuff, I think, would be useful in the immediate future. Hey, Van City. So over the next week, hopefully this weekend I'm going to get out into the wilderness. I'll finally be doing some more outdoor type videos. It's kind of hard to find a decent campground, and some of the national forest here is pretty good for that. But there's not a ton of federal land in Florida that is usable or doesn't have a lot of restrictions. Hey, Hudson Valley, how's it going? Yeah, exactly. Got to have their bread and milk. You know that firsthand. I'm sure that every time there's a blizzard, you run out and you help clean out all the bread and milk too right now. Nothing says making it through a blizzard when your power goes out like having milk. But yeah, so going out into the wilderness a little bit and really taking advantage of some of the nature opportunities here. I have, and I don't know if you can hear the fan in the distance, but I did end up partnering with a solar generator company. And based on the features of this generator, I'm pretty confident I'll be able to recommend it when I'm done with the T&E. But it was one of those things where I didn't want to jump into it because the expense, I mean, is not low, but the feature set and the fact that it's a contained unit and it's pretty waterproofed, that's the big sell. Like there's gaskets, there's rubber gaskets around everything. And for an outdoor or a survival unit, one that won't be exposed to the elements very easily, that just seemed like an easy pitch for me to be like, okay, maybe this is worth exploring. So no, the company is, one second. I'll go ahead and tell you guys. Montech is the brand of the generator. I just wanted to get that right. They're not a US-based company, but a lot of this stuff is unfortunately all imported, which is one of the reasons that I feel like if you jump into any of this stuff, you shouldn't wait too long, because the technology, the amount of components on these that we're dependent upon from other sources, it's not worth, I wouldn't delay. I mean, if you're not in a position to bite this off right now financially, I wouldn't do it. And if you don't have plenty of food and water already put back, I wouldn't do it. Or medical supplies, this would be kind of that capstone where you're already set with most of your other preps before you would jump into the solar generator stuff. That would be my recommendation. And really the big fact is it's a giant battery, right? So it's quiet. You can run it inside. It's not going to attract the attention that a big gas power generator is going to attract. I have a Honda and it's relatively quiet, but it's very loud when no one has electricity. If you live in a hurricane prone environment, when those generators are roaring around the clock, you can hear it. Yeah, no, yeah. We're down to about $4.30 a gallon locally, which is not bad. I never thought I'd say that. I was talking to a buddy on the phone. He's like, "Dude, it dropped to $4.10 out here. I'm so excited." I was like, "Who would have thought that we would have hyped at $4.10 a gallon?" But we're excited. It's what a state that we're in, huh? So the other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit today too, I don't know if you guys have been jumping into the some of the T&E, the defensive tool T&E videos lately, and I have to use my wording carefully on this platform, right? The expense of doing a lot of those reviews, it's rough. But that's one of the reasons I'm doing this camping trip, is because I will have access to a pretty decent range that's kind of near where I'll be camping. And I may do a separate video on that range. It looks pretty good. It's not cheap to access. It's a membership club. Unfortunately, Florida has reined in a lot of where you can actually shoot. And I don't find static ranges to be that entertaining. See you later, Hudson. Yeah, exactly. Gear reviews are so expensive to produce at this point on this platform, unless you are tied in with the company that are releasing these firearms or releasing stuff, and they're sending it to you, and you guys all launch your videos at the same time. And you'll notice that, right? When so let's say Springfield puts something out, and suddenly you'll have, like when they put out the Hell Pup, you had 20 or 30 videos popping up within 24 hours. And they all got a lot of views because it was a trending topic. So you do recoup a little bit of your money invested. I mean, they're not providing ammo for this stuff typically. So unless you've got like an ammo sponsor, you're still paying for gas, range fees, the time of your editing. Like this stuff can take a very long time to put together if you don't have your own production team. It is just me. So I definitely won't have grand thumb level content because I don't have that level of camera technology. I was actually looking at a drone to start using to help film. And then even just for general preparedness, I think having a good quality drone with a 4K camera that has a reasonable range, close to a mile, would be pretty advantageous to pick up at some point. But I don't have a computer that can handle that processing power. Yeah, Mario, I think prepping has not stopped being trendy over the last couple of years, now that you mention it. There's a lot more interest in it. We can see a lot of channels getting a lot more views and a lot more growth than we've seen over the past several years. Like, there was definitely a stagnant point during the last administration where people really weren't into it. I mean, I even stopped creating content for a huge period of time just because there was that kind of lull. And I didn't feel that there was a ton to contribute to stuff because things were relatively normal. And now that we've entered that new normal and things are a lot more fragile than they were, we certainly live in interesting times now. So there's a lot to talk about. We kind of had that lull, and then the summer of love started, and then things really began to pop off. Yeah, Hudson Valley, the DJI drones, that's something, if you do want to jump into, I would get one of those sooner rather than later. They do make a good product from what I've seen. I actually have one of their gimbals that unfortunately no longer works for the iPhone that I have, but their products are likely going to be banned from import because they are a Chinese subsidiary. There was some talk in Congress about that, which is the other reason I mentioned the drone thing, but I forgot to touch on this fact that because they all come from China and some of them are tied in with various state apparatuses there, Congress is looking to possibly ban a lot of product from those companies. So it's going to drive the prices up, and you may see a lot more home-brewed stuff. You can certainly build your own, and there's plenty of information here, but it's not an inexpensive endeavor. And unless you're kind of tech savvy, I mean, I would prefer personally just to buy a pre-assembled unit just for the reliability sake. And then if something goes wrong, I have someone I can contact, versus if I build it myself, then I just have me to blame when it crashes, right? But yeah. So the other issue, and touching back on that T&E thing, do you guys have a lot of federal land around you? Like, I don't know. I've been, like I said, struggling to find, other than like that one solid range, and it's very expensive. China was downloading all videos from DJI drones. They probably are. I didn't doubt that the moment I downloaded the app onto my phone, that it was basically glorified spyware. That's been a big issue with a lot of technology. Like TikTok, they put out all those advisories to the military to stop using it, or to be careful where you're using this stuff on base. And that a lot of the, even the running apps that people were using, they were able to kind of like get a pretty good idea beyond satellite imagery, like people's running paths and like details of bases because of people's movements. So OPSEC is huge. I just made a whole video on that yesterday with what happened to the people who opted to volunteer to go fight in Ukraine. And they had, it seems that all the volunteers, regardless of like what unit they were joining. So like the video that I made yesterday starts off with a testimonial from a guy who joined the Georgian Legion. And I think there are still some elements of them and the other volunteers that are still operational, but a huge number of them were killed over the 48 hours ago, not even, which partly because they were posting all over social media where they were located, which is just absolutely insane. Anytime you take a photo, it geotags unless you turn that feature off. And then even if you have enough stuff in the background, someone with the right technology or the right observation skills can kind of put it together based on the photos you're taking about where you should be, and go from there. Any recommendations on cheaper drones that aren't glorified spyware? That's rough. From the bulk of what I've seen, unless you're like building your own, and then even then, I'm not sure that you'd be able to operate it at any great distance. I'm by no means an expert on drones. I just introduced the idea simply because I know they're trying to get rid of a lot of the imported stuff that's available right now. So, and if that happens, it's just going to drive the prices sky high. And then, of course, because it does use things that are in short supply right now, the batteries, all the microchips and everything. Ford is now shipping trucks and SUVs without chips. So that's where we're at on that. That one's like barely getting any acknowledgement or recognition as to what's going on. But yeah, I would I would hunt around a little bit. I think once you hit that sweet spot of maybe $300 or $400, you may have hit the point of diminishing return, because once you get into that price level, you could get about a mile of range on it, which, you're supposed to, by FAA rules, keep these within line of sight. But if we're talking collapse type stuff, then or natural disaster type events, you might have a little leeway. Just be very careful. And then if it's past a certain weight class, you are supposed to register them with the FAA. It's like a $5 fee. So yeah, no, Joe, exactly. The guy's who one overseas. Yeah, I mean it's like I said, I feel like a lot of them had their heart in the right place, but it just really, a lot of them really did not have any real world knowledge, no military background. One of the accounts from the conflict over there that went out on Reddit, they mentioned there was a group of 10 guys who went out. They were lightly armed. They didn't have anti-tank weapons. One of their guys opened fire on a tank with an AK, and 8 of the 10 were taken out immediately. And the other 2 basically had to crawl back to their base. So they're not really receiving training. There's a reason why they're not giving a lot of them weapons, obviously, because they just don't have the expertise to really be out there doing that. Which really, like, again, if you have friends or know people who are considering going and they're not well versed in combat and things, and not prior military, or at least ex-law enforcement or something, you better shake them and be like, do not go. Do not go. If anything, and I was watching the Warrior Poet Society video with James Yeager, and he said some pretty controversial things over the years, and I think a lot of people over time have kind of begun to, if they didn't agree initially with a lot of the stuff he has to say, they're like, later on, they're like, okay, maybe he was right about a lot of stuff. But it's been really sad to watch his health decline. And it was kind of a bittersweet interview that they did. And he is going to Ukraine. So they raised some funds. They're buying a car in Poland. They're driving in. If you're not familiar with that story. So I wish them the best on that. I hope they've done their research and their due diligence, but it doesn't appear that your ability to leave Ukraine really exists once you get there. If you're a military age guy, if you're going in, because they're treating you as a conscript and they're holding you to that contract. So if things go south, you are 100% on your own. So I would highly not recommend it because they aren't even using these units in the capacity that a lot of places would, where they would just like backfill or like, again, go help grandma across the street type stuff. They're sitting there, and that's all they're doing mostly. Again, I'm sure some are more engaged in combat. The guys who have been in it for a while, like I know the Georgian Legion has been around for a while. A lot of those guys came over in the early days of this conflict. So if you went over and you learned the language and you learn how to fight and maybe you obtain citizenship that way, then you might actually do something. Otherwise, you're glorified cannon fodder in a lot of cases for the government that currently exists there. And unfortunately, Western media keeps pumping out a lot of stuff that's not really reflective of what's going on. And it's really dangerous. And if anything, I keep seeing them continue to goad and want to set up the United States to put together that no-fly zone, which would be really, really bad if we were to make this conflict our conflict, which we already have, basically. That even goes back to the fitness thing I was mentioning at the beginning. If you're a younger guy, you may want to consider working on your fitness even more so, because the likelihood of a lot of us being called up or guys being activated or called back in, depending on what your discharge status was, or if you've never served, I think became a lot more likely, especially if you live in Europe. If you're watching this from Europe, I think the likelihood that you will be called to active service is much higher than it's ever been. If you just look at the activities that NATO is doing right now. And then even Russia reactivating a lot of Arctic bases. They've been doing that over the last several years, but they've poured more resources into these Arctic military bases. So they may move some strategic nukes or things to the Arctic again, which would put them in a much closer range of the Dakotas to do I think Russia is going to cut underwater cables? So we've seen a bit of that already. What was it into like Norway, I want to say, or Sweden had some internet cables that were already cut within the past couple of months by submarine. I think there's a really good chance that that happens. I think we'll see more countries try to interfere with that type of stuff. It won't really affect Russia too much or China because they have their own intranet. So they're still able to basically hunker down, where the Western world is so tied in with the global system that we have that if we were to go down, if our internet went down, we would be in dire straits because, I mean, let's face it, how much stuff can you even get, locally at this point? Like anytime I go to the store and I try to spend my money local, even if it's at a big box store, because at least it helps keep jobs there, because most of our small mom and pop retailers they're just gone. So if I can spend money locally, I will. And if I could stand in that line, I'll wait 10 minutes. I would prefer not to use the self-checkout for the same kind of reason. But yeah, I mean, if all that goes down, if our computer systems go down in these big box stores, I've seen it even with power outages where you go in and you try to do commerce even with cash, and they're like, oh, I can't ring you out because our computer system is down. Like, we are so tied in, and there has been no hardening really of any of this, even when you've had multiple meetings, multiple hearings in front of various committees in Congress suggesting that we need to harden our infrastructure, and it's just not happening. It's not happening. One of my favorite tests comes to mind where the government hacked our own systems. We hacked part of the power grid, and they targeted a substation. And that substation, what they were able to do is they were able to crank up the power at that substation to the point where they almost burned out the whole substation. And if they had been successful in that effort, there would have been a major blackout. So the fact that that's such a vulnerability, I think the cyber warfare frontier, in addition to the cable cutting, maskless, is going to be probably what will accelerate a lot of this as we keep pouring weapons into the region. And if you watch that flight radar stuff, I'll keep an eye on it. Maybe check it every couple days now because there hasn't really been a lot of status change. But one of the interesting highlights, we know that most military aircraft aren't running their transponders. We know that, like, especially the Russians, they have all theirs turned off because they're not dumb. We keep ours on for some reason in a lot of areas, but maybe only, as some people have alluded to, that they have one transponder on and there might be half a dozen aircraft moving. So we're not getting the big picture as to just how much equipment is moving into Ukraine. I mean, we know it's a lot, but they definitely are hiding their real numbers and their movement. And we've seen a lot more surveillance planes that have been flying around Poland and Romania over the last 48 hours because there was a break in that. And I mean, I'm sure we have drones and other things that are flying over. I mean, we know that because the Ukrainians are definitely receiving quite a bit of help at this point. Yeah, no, it is really sad how much dependence we have on technology at this point. I mean, again, like if any of this stuff goes down, banking really, you've seen a lot of rumblings of that. And even just a basic ransomware attack on one of our major banks would be devastating. And with the run on banks in Russia, like their little mini bank run, and we saw it here in the United States too, at the beginning of the past several years, where people were going into banks in New York and they were pulling out $20,000, $50,000 at a time. Banks don't have that much cash on hand. So to prevent themselves from becoming insolvent, essentially, they were bringing in money trucks nonstop to a lot of banks. And the operations really stepped up on that end of things. So having a fair amount of cash on hand is certainly great. But at the same time, as I pointed out, if you try to even use your cash at a lot of retailers, if their computers are down, they're not going to take it because they have no way to actually conduct commerce in an old school manner still, which is just absolutely bonkers to me. So anyway, I'm probably going to go ahead and begin to wrap this up. If there's anything anyone wanted to chime in about, If there's any additional content you'd like to see from me, I had a number of people again asking for more gear and T&E reviews that I'm working on right now, actually. So I filmed a war belt video and one that I think is a little more applicable to the civilian world. But I want to get some more outdoor footage mixed in with that before I put that one out, so it has a little higher production value than just mostly inside my house and tabletop type stuff. So I will open the floor to you guys for just a moment, and then I'll wrap things up. Alrighty, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and close things down, seeing as no one's got anything for me at the moment. And if you do, feel free to drop a comment later on if you change your mind. If grid goes down, what avenue do you recommend civilians to get situational info? I mean, like your basic NOAA type radios would be huge. The hurricane radios would be good. Having some of those stored in a manner where they would be EMP resistant would be good. Faraday cages, that type of thing. Ham radio will certainly roar back to life. That might be a good option. You can get into that pretty inexpensively, and then learning how to use the repeaters, because you can push those, even those handheld Baofeng UV5Rs, especially the older models. You can push those really far if you get onto a repeater. While I was living out west, I knew a guy who was able to extend from like western Colorado, eastern Colorado, all the way down to the Springs using a repeater and a Baofeng. And I think he was using the standard antenna, which is kind of crazy. So that all becomes pretty critical, but that's not to say that someone couldn't leap in and jam a lot of those frequencies up too. That's really basic technology. So you may have a lot of interference with that. So I wouldn't completely rely on that. And that's also why I mentioned the drone thing, because that's going to give you really, really good real-time information as to what's going on directly around you. And especially with some of the large events we've seen where thousands of people have been moving through cities and suburbs and things, having a drone for those events would be huge, because it can definitely help you decide as to what course of action you need to take next. Whether or not you need to organize your neighbors or whatever the case is, whatever that situation may dictate. And with how fluid a lot of things can be now, that's why I would definitely recommend a drone for that type of stuff. As I mentioned, right around that $300-400 mark, I think is more than enough, and you'll get something that has some pretty impressive range on it. Well, you're welcome, Maskless Neanderthal. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And we will close things down now.